exist. It says Agile does not throw away the process, so you can have both. CMMI prescriptions can be applied to any methodology. CMMI is not dependent on, it does not dominate any, does not recommend any specific life cycle model or a development model. Some key reasons for no or not sure, interestingly, is the different focus, people-centric versus process-centric. I know we're talking about plant-centric here, but these are some of the reasons people said why it cannot coexist. Agile is compatible till L3 and not beyond that. What does CMMI say on this? CMMI version 1.3 has formally acknowledged Agile. These are the exact words as picked up from CMMI 1.3 for development. To help those who use Agile to interpret CMMI practices, there have been nodes added to specific process areas. It goes on to say, even if you're not using Agile approach, you still find value in this. So there was the background for this entire, the motivation for SEI to take it up is also provided in the notes. It's probably one reason why the high maturity organizations felt that CMMI and Agile can coexist, because they are looking into the certifications, they are looking into 1.3, they think that CMMI and Agile can coexist, whereas some people who have not looked into it probably do not think that they can coexist. What is probably the need is the practitioner groups of CMMI and Agile to integrate both the practices to ensure that good practices are ensured from both. Can Agile coexist with other life cycle models? How does Agile and other things, other models use? Can you integrate Lean and Agile? In the Agile conference 2012 in Bangalore, interestingly, there was a Lean stage where we wanted to see what Lean practices are getting adopted in Agile. I was one of the reviewers there, but what we predominantly noticed there was Kanban was widely used. Almost all the papers were on Kanban. There are other techniques like DSM, VSM, waste elimination, which are kind of not getting exposed or not being explored by Agile projects. And can we integrate Agile best practices into other life cycle models? 46% of the respondents have said yes. They do take best practices from Agile and adopt it in their traditional life cycle models, be it the waterfall or the B process model. Some of the good practices adopted are listed here. I will not, the report is available, so it's predominantly the daily standard, iteration planning, retrospective, etc. What are the benefits of Agile adoption? This is very much in line with the benefits reported in other surveys conducted worldwide and conducted specifically for India. Better management of requirements, priorities, risks, improved time to market, improved customer satisfaction. These are what are predominantly coming out as the key benefits of Agile. What we wanted to explore is how these Agile benefits are perceived by senior management, process professionals, the different roles played across the organization. Handling risks and improved customer satisfaction were predominantly raised as a key benefit by Agile team and Agile coach. Managing changing priorities and better project visibility were recorded as the key benefits by senior management and process professionals. And if you compare the benefits perceived across the Agile experience, you would notice that benefits perceived increases with Agile experience in line with the practices adopted, in line with the metrics that are being measured. So the sooner you adopt Agile practices, the sooner we are going to get the benefits. The sooner we start measuring Agile projects, be it the Agile metrics or other traditional metrics like defect density, which most organizations said they don't like to measure that. The sooner we adopt it, the more the benefits. What are the barriers to Agile adoption? I know I'm rushing through this. I see some of you having a very quizzical mind. It's just because of time, the detailed report is available. I'm sure our email IDs are going to be there. So please feel free to write to us if you're not able to, or if no question pops up right now. What are the main barriers to Agile adoption is the lack of coordinated transition to Agile, which was reported even in the panel discussions. The organizations that have been traditionally using waterfall or a V process model, when they move to Agile, it's the same team, it's the same person who's going to do things slightly differently when they move a kind of project. A person who is used to having everything documented upfront, they're going to say, okay, here's your user story and start doing it. So that, how do you transition that? That seems to be the major barrier reported. Almost 73% of the respondents said that this is their major barrier. So Agile consultants, coaches, senior management have to focus on how to transition projects to working on a traditional model to Agile. And some of the things like management not interested, budget constraint came quite low. Those do not seem to be the major barrier. But what we heard from panel discussions also is, apart from this, is a lack of focus among the PM community, PMO. It's the middle management. We're not talking about the senior management here. And lack of skilled resources comes up as about 59% here. We heard a lot during the panel discussions also, in line with our low adoption of TDD and refactoring. I'm sorry, I'm going back to that time and again. How are the barriers perceived depending on the role played in the organization? You could see that the senior management and the process professionals rated the barriers, or they felt they reported much higher barriers than the Agile coaches and the Agile team. It's probably not that big a deal to adopt Agile. So once you start embarking that, I always like to call it like a Bangalore traffic. You watch from outside, yes, it looks quite messy, but once you embark it, it's not. Once you start the journey, you move on. You reach your destination eventually. So it's not as bad as the barriers portrayed outside. Okay. The size and the Agile experience of the organization had no significant impact on the barriers. It's not like once you're quite into the organization, some of the senior management and the process professionals continue to think some of them as barriers, which may not be so. Or maybe I would say the Agile team and the Agile consultant will have to work more on reducing the perceived barriers of Agile. Just a slide to look at the impacts on the benefits and barriers as viewed. What would be the impact on the customers, management and team for the recorded benefits and barriers? I'll just give you a second to go through this. Maybe I quickly read. For the customer, the key benefit reported was time to market. Management handling changing priorities. For team, we saw better collaboration, better team morale, and handling changing requirements. On the barriers, there's a perception that Agile cannot handle maintenance, Agile cannot handle enhancements. Once the product is developed, there's no documentation. So the product becomes unmaintainable. We're not debating that. There's a perceived barrier that has high impact on the customers. From the management side, again, the lack of coordinated transition, and there's a resistance to change. The team feels there's a technical complexity, or the entire idea of moving to a focused engineering environment with a very short cycles as a key barrier, with the lack of tool and automation. We see those barriers, those levels are also quite low in the initial adoption. These are some of the challenges and possible solutions expressed during the panel discussions. There are quite a few of them. I would like to highlight key ones that came up repeatedly during our panel discussions. Fixed price model versus T&M model. It's worked well in T&M, it doesn't work in fixed price. So we'll probably have to think of a hybrid model to see how we could do that. Communication, collaboration challenges between sub-teams. There's a large program, there are many sub-teams. Handling dependencies there came up as a major challenge, and people have overcome it that by designing effective daily stand-up meetings and having good effective Scrum or Scrums. And infrastructure needs. This came as a challenge in almost all the panel discussions, if I remember. So some of the senior management will have to focus on, or you have to budget for tools and automation right up front in case of Agile projects, without which Agile, we saw that it doesn't give you much benefits. Some of the benefits perceived, or some of the best practices, recording retrospection. This is something that I've also frequently encountered, that during retrospection, there is a lot of improvements that comes up, but it doesn't get recorded. We pick up a few, implement them, and the rest gets forgotten. So some of them said we record those retrospection, and we do track them in Agile tools. There needs to be more encouragement for TDD and behavior-driven development. The world is moving away from test-driven to a behavior-driven development. More encouragement from all ends, from management, from Agile coaches needed on that area. Usage of Agile training from time to time. Participation in Agile conferences, Agile forums seems to be one of the best practices, highly reported best practices. Others are there in the report for detailed perusal. Final words, Agile as a methodology has been well adopted. India is not new to Agile, we have well adopted it. We have can I say mastered it? I'm not so sure, but yes, 50% of the respondents have said yes, we have been using it. We have been using it for 2 years. We have put it in our QMS. We are using Scrum predominantly, Scrum, XP Hybrid, and Kanban being the next widely used things. And can it work across all domains? The answer seems to be yes, because it has been used in almost all the domains. Can it work on different types of projects? Can it work on maintenance? Can it work on enhancements? The answer again seems to be yes, because many of the organizations have said they do use it. And distributed Agile, what about Agile talking about a co-located team? So that question I do still face. I've been working with Agile teams for the last 6-7 years now. I still get the questions. But over 75% of the respondents have confirmed that distributed Agile is what they practice, and it is a reality, and it is there to stay. It's not as difficult as it is perceived to be. We see that Scrum is being predominantly adopted, while adoption of engineering practices, we seem to be lagging from whatever the organizations, predominantly from BSpin, Bangalore-based organizations. Usage of metrics and automation do increases, and coexistence of Agile and CMMI have been quite well agreed upon. What are the next steps? Probably the data benchmarking of Agile projects. Maybe practitioner groups from CMMI and Agile, like I mentioned earlier, will have to integrate the two and adopt the best practices from both these different frameworks to get what we can get. I'm now open for question and answers. You're on the concluding slide.
Absolutely fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kalpana. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's Kalpana who is giving you BSpin Agile Practice Benchmark Report 2012. Request you to stay right here. And I request Mr. KSG Shankar to kindly join us and give a memento of respect to Kalpana. And also, ladies and gentlemen, the executive summary is available in the stall right there behind you for free. Thank you so much, Kalpana, and thank you so much for honoring, sir. The executive summary is available in the stall for free right behind you, and at the same time, the detailed report will be available for purchase on BSpin website, that is bspin.org. And we'll have a quick break. I think we'll take a break for about 15 minutes. We'll be back in the next 15 minutes, and I think we'll be doing the announcements 2 minutes before the time is up for the panel. Yahoo! Thank you so much for joining us, sir. Pleasure to have you. And also, ladies and gentlemen, to talk a little about Mr. Verma has been involved with high-tech software product development over the last 2 decades with DRDO. And our next panelist is Preeti Madhu, Head of Consulting, ThoughtWorks India. Preeti is the Head of Consulting Services Group and is responsible for delivery of consulting offerings around business agility, software delivery, acceleration and optimization using lean and agile techniques. She has also been involved in many distributed projects as a BA and then PM. And now I'd like to call upon onto the stage the next panelist, the co-founder, President and Chief People Officer, Happiest Minds Technology Private Limited, Mr. Raja Shanmugam. Let's give a big round of applause to Mr. Raja. Thank you so much for joining us, sir. He holds a vast experience in the IT industry for more than 25 years. And also, before co-founding Happiest Minds, he was the CEO of Mindtree. And yeah, also some interesting things about him is He was the CEO of Mindtree Foundation, where he implemented challenging and innovative initiatives for persons with disabilities in primary education. And finally, the next panelist joining us is, ladies and gentlemen, consulting partner QAI Global Services, Mr. D. Shankara Raman. Let's give a big round of applause to Mr. Shankara Raman, who holds multiple accreditations from SEI and is a consulting partner at QAI. Thank you so much for joining us, and we begin with the first panel discussion, ladies and gentlemen. That is People Track.
Hey, thanks for the nice introduction, and also happy that he saved me the job of introducing the panelists. So in that sense, we saved some time, right? We are already running 15 minutes behind schedule. So my first, congratulations to the DSpin on the eve of the 20th anniversary. It's been a very, very fruitful journey. I've been fortunate to have been associated with it for 5-6 years in between, when we were actually scaling up and struggling sometimes to actually figure out what is the next phase of our journey. So it's wonderful to know that the momentum has sustained over the last 20 years. The next 20 years will be very, very, very different. I can tell the executive committee and the advisory group that it's not going to be a continuation of the last 20 years. Unless you are very different. We need to be different to keep up with the growing demands in the marketplace. So the theme for the panel discussion and the conference overall, it's a wonderful theme, creative theme in my opinion. Wonderful idea in terms of blending the two diverse spectrums of the software development. The ways of producing software, the creative, exercising the creative mind, the craftsmanship way of generating software, driving software development. In fact, if you really look at the birth of Google, two people created Google, and today you know that they're one of the largest, one of the most sought after corporations in the whole world, right? Primarily driven by people, actually. So it's wonderful to know that we've had that influence one of the parts of the theme for the conference. The other side of the industrialization, that will be the subject of panel discussion in the afternoon. The process, the tools, the orientation from that perspective. We all know the software industry has evolved over the last 40 to 50 years, especially the last 20 years. India has been in some sense the forefront of the software industry and the movement. And there's a lot of, we have seen the process, the engineering, software engineering side go through a significant momentum over the last 15 years. But the last 5 to 6 years, you would have actually seen a change in the momentum towards the people track, especially the agile and the lean movements. And that's one of the primary subjects of debate in terms of perspectives as part of this panel discussion. Now, the software, one of the fundamental reasons for this is the fact that we need to produce software much quicker. The ability to be fast in terms of response to the market, be nimble to the marketplace, and also to be able to meet with the diverse demands. Now, if you look at the size and complexity growth over the last 10 to 15 years, operating systems run into 50 million lines of code, 60 million lines of code, right? Developed across the world. It's not developed in one location. If you look at Linux, again, the way that Linux has been distributed or developed in a distributed environment, the way people work and collaborate with each other, I think that's a object lesson for the way we need to work around the world in terms of producing software for the new generation. I think that's a extremely important thing to look at, and how you work and collaborate with each other is something as a new, we need to look at a completely different paradigm. And that's really what Agile has actually kept advocating over the last 10, 12 years that it's been around. It's a change management paradigm. It's not just a question of implementing a methodology or a process or an approach, as most consultants make it out to be actually, rather than people who have been in the game actually know that if you want to succeed with Agile, it's not a prescriptive process, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 like CMMI is. Or I would say CMMI is prescriptive, but I can't talk about it from that angle. But certainly, it's a lot more about the way you get people to work around, the culture, the leadership involvement, getting the individuals motivated and getting the teams to work as self-managed teams rather than manager-managed teams. That's a fundamental paradigm shift, right? From being managed by your manager to actually being told that you can manage yourself today. And it's a completely different paradigm for many of us who have grown up in an environment where we've always been told to do 1, 2, 3, right? In your college, in your school, in your And we have been, we were talking about, during the introductory meeting with each other, as part of the panel, we actually said we have grown up in an environment where asking questions is not really encouraged, right? On the other hand, today we talk about teams managing themselves without necessarily manager coming into the picture by and large. So it's a fundamental shift, and we need to figure out how organizations actually respond to the challenges in getting teams to be self-managed rather than manager-managed. I think that's something that I would like the panel to spend some time discussing on what kind of challenges exist and how organizations typically overcome those challenges. But having said that, Agile is not only about people and the collaboration or the governance mechanism that's actually different. It's not just about teamwork and managing teams. There's a lot more to it that comes from in terms of new kind of practices, right? If you look at the kind of practices that XP advocates, continuous build, integration, extreme, the test automation, test-driven development, acceptance test-driven development, pair programming. A lot of these are practices that actually are absolutely required for Agile to succeed. It's not just the management practices that Scrum advocates, for example. That's important for Agile to succeed, but even these practices are important. Some of these are a subject of debate again for the afternoon panel. I would leave it to that. But certainly this panel is going to be spending some time in terms of sharing their experience. Very distinguished panel. I think the introduction was brief, but you have a detailed description of what their backgrounds are, so I would not go into that. But the panel is going to share their perspectives on some key themes. We debated that. Relating to getting the best from people, we expect the panel to explore aspects such as skill development, retention, building on the collective knowledge of people, empowered teams, outcome-aligned processes, and shorter cycle times. How do individuals, teams, organizations respond to these challenges for making these things happen? So I think that's the kind of themes that the panel will be deliberating on, sharing their perspectives. It's a very the panel is a very elite panel. The guys, the people here have worked and experienced some of the people-related aspects in the way they have actually done work for several years. So I'm also looking forward to listening to them and sharing our perspectives overall and summarizing and providing some inputs there. And we expect you to ask a lot of questions. So the way the panel is structured is each panelist, I would expect them to spend about 10 to 12 minutes highlighting their perspectives from their experience on aspects relevant to people. And then we will have 30 minutes at the end for Q&A. So if you have any questions, I would like you to reserve those questions to the end. Pass on a chit. We'll have volunteers on both sides to collect those chits and hand over to the panel here. We will address those questions in the end. We expect to get about 25 to 30 minutes in the end to address questions. So without waiting any further, let me request Preeti to share her perspectives first in terms of what her thoughts are on the people aspects. Thank you.
Okay, so while the deck comes on, thanks a lot, Jerry. I think he embarrassed me a little bit because he had this nice long paper in which he had all his notes written down very, very neatly for which he was looking, and I was careless enough to lose my notes somewhere. So I have a makeshift notes right now, so excuse me on that bit. And the other thing was, I think very well mentioned in terms of what we're going to be talking about. I'll probably be taking a little bit of a deviation from the overall topic and looking at it a little tangentially myself, and instead of talking about cycle time and people and all of that stuff, I'll talk about something which is a little more meta level. And I'm hoping a lot of questions would come up in terms of how that's done and how can it be possible. Is that even something that can be implemented? And I can talk about some of my experiences in that. I'm skipping the introduction because, oh damn, the mic is here, forgot. Skipping the introduction because JV and our friend earlier had done a great job with that. Can you hear me if I don't use the mic? You can still hear me? Yes. So I'll prep it to move away. I can be constrained by a podium. Okay, so that's what I'm going to be talking about. I'm going to be giving a very, very brief introduction on how we think culture and innovation are tied together, right? And the reason I want to bring out innovation specifically is because a lot of what we do, we're just used to doing things the way we know and what we've been doing for the last so many years. And that probably constrains us from actually becoming better at what we want, right? And I'll talk about a few things, and just before I talk about what we mean by organization culture and what we mean by innovation as well. Do we believe that they're related in any way? Can I have a show of hands in terms of number of people who believe that innovation and culture are related? Fantastic, so I'm preaching to a choir really. But anyway, so I love Dilbert, so whoever has heard me speak before would have always seen a Dilbert in my presentation, and here's not disappointing those people. There's a Dilbert that talks about organization culture, right? Now, is that really what organization culture is all about? Just giving you a minute to read it as well. Right? Is that how we look at organization culture? I mean, to be honest to ourselves, if we were to look into ourselves and say, is that what my organization culture means to me? I don't want to know whether it's true or false, but you would know that better. Right? Now, before we move on, just want to kind of set up what organization culture means, right? I think one of the most critical parts, beyond reading these words, is the fact that organization culture is a very unseen, intangible thing, but it's very, very forceful in our day-to-day lives, right? It's something that dictates the way we behave, the way we work, and the way we expect everybody around us to behave in an organization, right? This is something, whether we like it or not, is set by leadership, is set by people up there who know what they're doing and who know which way the company is going to go, and it is then reinforced by every single living member within the organization. Fair enough? Right? It has a bunch of rituals, it has a bunch of symbols, we have heroes, we have all of these things that come in as a part of organization culture, right? Now, if that is organization culture, what is innovation, right? Just to be clear, I'm not talking about breakthrough innovations which nobody in the world has ever thought about. We're not talking about creating another matchstick, right? Whether you like it or not, and whether you realize it or not, matchstick is one of the most innovative things that have ever come up. There's nothing that has replaced a matchstick since, right? Other than a lighter, of course. But you don't use a lighter to light your gas stove, right? So matchstick is innovative stuff, although it doesn't seem that big. But we're not talking about those kind of innovations, right? We're not talking about innovations that's going to last a zillion years. What we're talking about is not improvements either, right? That's not what innovation is all about. Innovation is very different from inventing, and it's very different from improving, right? It's about doing something that you're doing in a very different way that brings in either new value to the customer that you're serving, or is going to reduce or going to improve something that you have done in a very, very different format, right? So it could either change the way you've done something and bring in a value that you haven't thought about, or it is about doing what you've done in the past, but in such a different, innovative fashion that it kind of changes the way you worked, right? Now, if those things are innovation and culture, why do organizations struggle with it? It's pretty straightforward, right? All of us want to be innovative and all of us love good culture, yes? Why do organizations struggle with these two things? Yes, no? How many people believe that organizations struggle with this? Lesser show of hands, okay. Okay, for those who believe that organizations do struggle with this, here are some very, very high-level thoughts on why we think there is the struggle. Why do we on a daily basis struggle with the need to innovate versus the need to do what we're doing and continue doing what we're doing and remaining in our comfort zone, right? One of the things is a goal focus versus a focus on the means. Is that self-explanatory? Yes? How often do we get up in the morning and say, what is my goal? What am I really trying to achieve in my job today? Versus saying, I'm going to sign in my register, I'm going to go sit at my desk, I'm going to open my laptop, right? Not saying that it's not needed, you need to do all of that, but there is a purpose, a goal that we forget, because that's out there somewhere, right? Easygoing work culture versus strict work culture. Now, let me clarify. When I say easygoing, doesn't mean that you can walk in at 12 and walk out at 5, and when you're there in office, be on Facebook all the time. That's not what it means. Obviously, he was not very happy with my voice projection, but anyway, thank you. It's not about that, right? What we mean by easy work culture is a culture which allows people a slack time to do things differently. And let's accept the fact that without slack, you cannot think and do things differently. If you are in a culture which is completely focused on extreme utilization, on extremely time-bound activities, on doing things at this point and this way and that way, innovation is out of the window, right? Because people do not have the time or the freedom to take a step back from what they're doing and say, is there a better way to do this, right? So that's the difference between easygoing and strict. So don't misread the easygoing, the word easygoing over there. Open system versus closed system. It's again quite self-explanatory, right? How open is your organization as a system? Every system gets an input, processes the data. Okay, this is like very funny. Okay, sorry, but I'm going to move away. Processes the data and gives an output, right? Now, a system could be open in terms of getting that information, processing, receiving feedback, reprocessing, giving the data back to the external environment, or it can be very close to say, this is what I do, I take what I need and I give out what I want, and you deal with the rest of it, right? If you talk about systems thinking, you will get a better understanding of what open system and closed systems are. Now, the last one is not a versus. It really is a question that each one of us need to ask ourselves, is the degree of identification with the organization, right? Versus it just being a job. I think when you look at yourself, most importantly, and when you look at your peers and you look at everybody else in the organization, you can ask a question, how many of us come here on a day-to-day basis and deeply associate with the purpose that our organization is here for today, right? How much do I even know about why my organization is around? Why my organization survived 100 years or 180 years or 50 years or 20 years or even 2 years, right? What is it trying to do? And what am I trying to do for that organization along with that organization, right? Very, very high-level stuff. I do expect a lot of questions, so please don't hesitate. Now, this is not this or that. This is not an or situation, right? It usually is an and situation, right? It is usually a combination of both that you need to do at work. And this is not something, and this was the interesting debate that we were having when we were in our breakout before the panel discussion. And it was like, really, I mean, what do you expect each individual in this room to walk away with after this entire conversation, right? The entire point is that this is not something that you need to wait for somebody else to do for you, right? A lot of these things are something that you as an individual can start implementing, incorporating, and bringing about a change in yourself, which will hopefully make a difference in the long term, right? And that's my last discourse for the day around innovation. If you think this is innovation, then I think we've probably lost the thread somewhere. Yeah? Just giving you a minute to read it. Yeah, I love Dilbert because he has a way of putting things across which, without making it sound very nasty. That's a picture of ThoughtWorks, but we can talk about it. But that's all I had for the day. Thank you.
Thanks, Preeti. Thanks for a wonderful introduction on cultural innovation. So we'll probably do a summary towards the end in terms of getting all thoughts together. But the question lines are open, so anytime that you have a question, just raise your hand and somebody from the BSpin group will collect that question. So can I request Tathagat to share his perspectives, please?
Morning everyone. I have a bad throat, so I hope you can bear with me for the next 10 minutes. I think you have all come here not to confirm what you already know, but to just pick up some more things that you disagree with in the first place. So I'm going to help you in that process. I hope to succeed in that process because I think life is not worth living complying with what others have set out for us. At least that's what I believe. So just to set a context, even though we are talking about people and processes here, I would just, for the sake of this conversation, like to take a position here and say, it is the people which is more important than process. And let me explain you why it is the case. The way I look at a process is really a sociological aspect of what the society is all about. I mean, the processes is not something that nature has created for us. If anything, nature has only created, there's a beautiful book by Gary Hamel which came out this year, which the title is What Matters Now. And he says, thank God for all the screw-ups that happened in genetic evolution in the last 4 billion years, without which we would not be human beings, we would all be slime today. And I think there's a very powerful point that Gary Hamel brings out there. So the point here is that process is really a reflection of the sociology at that point in time. And if people change, so should the processes change. And that's what I'm going to talk about here. So let's understand what craft are we. I mean, the topic is craft using. Let's understand what is really the craft that we're talking about here. And I'll give you the source a little later, but I would like you to really reflect upon, does it make sense to us? So what is the craft? We're talking about programming. We're talking about programming as a craft here. And programming, does it bring to you the sheer joy of making things? If you have children, if you have ever bought gift for children, try bringing a gift which is like ready-made kind of a gift and give it to a child, only to see that the child loses any interest in that in the next 10 minutes. Instead of that, get them the Lego building blocks. Let them make the shabbiest castle in the world and then painfully and then take it apart and then once again build something else. Which one gives, do you think, more joy to the children? I think we are all fundamentally children at heart. We love putting things together, we love breaking them apart, and we love once again doing it together. And that's what programming really brings the best out of us as individuals. The pleasure of doing things that are useful to other people. Man is, I think we all remember from our high school books, man is a social animal, right? We exist in the context of a larger society. We exist because we believe that we have a role to play in the larger context of society, and one of the things is really to be useful to other people, to do stuff that is really helpful to other people. And then there is a fascination of really putting it all together and seeing it work. And putting all these building blocks together and saying, okay, now this something was working, I write another program and see, okay, I can see something coming on the screen here, I can see something happening there. That is the fun of really seeing it. The joys of always learning, because which is sprinting from the non-repetitive nature of the task. Very few professions in this world are really truly blessed to be doing things that are non-repetitive in nature. I think we have done something exceptionally good in our past lives to deserve a life to be in this kind of a domain where we can afford to do stuff that is non-repetitive in nature. And finally, the delight of working in such a tractable medium. There is no other medium that offers you the kind of economies of scale, economies of malleability, economies of docility, which allows you to change the shape and form the way you would like to do that. Try telling it to somebody who is doing work with steel and brass, how difficult it is for them to mold the medium that they would like to do that. Does it make sense? Do these 5 things make sense? Now these 5 things were actually written by Fred Brooks in the Mythical Man Month in 1975, 37 years back. I think they still hold true, right? So that is our profession really all about. It still is as timeless as it was when Fred Brooks was directing the IBM 360 operating system development back in 60s. If we come back to today, what we are seeing is that the pace of innovation is accelerating. And just to set the context, I know it's a very busy slide here. I don't expect you to read that, but I've tried to create 2 or 3 major slots here. One of them is from 1975 to 2000, and then from 2000 to 2010, and then 2011 onwards. And these are some of the names that I have written here, which are really the brand names that we have come to associate with a lot of stuff that we are using day in and day out. If you see the amount of new companies that really developed in the 75 to 2000 as compared to that in the last 10 years, humongous amount of innovation has really happened there. And in 2011, I could only find one name, but this one name, I'm sure many of you know about that. It is a 700-day-old company with 14 employees that had 30 million users, 0 revenue, gets bought out for $1 billion. They actually wanted $2 billion from Zuckerberg, but he only gave them $1 billion, right? So that's the kind of an innovation we are talking about. What is common about each of these companies is a very interesting thing that I would like to leave the question hanging till we move on to the next slide, so just keep thinking about that. Sadly, and again, you can crucify me for that, but sadly none of this came from the big processes, frameworks, and certifications that we have come to think about. That's the reality. They all came out of students working in undergraduate labs. They all came out of PhD students. They all came out employees who were working in the large companies, and they went inside in a garage with loads of beer and loads of aspirations in their eyes and fire in the belly, and they came out with these killer products. That is the real world that exists today. So when we see that at the outset of JV talked about how Agile Manifesto did talk about Agile Manifesto, the beauty of that was the first time there was a crowdsourced process that came into existence. Everything else before that was really a top-down process, whereas this was the first bottom-up process that really came about. It did bring the people back into the equation, because if you talk about all these fabulous list of companies there, the only factor common that I see there is people factor in that. So Agile did bring people factor back into the equation, but I think that did not really solve the problem. In fact, one of the Agile Manifesto signatories, Kent Back, talked about that last year, and he personally felt that the language of Agile Manifesto is irrelevant today. There is a saying that says, today's solutions are tomorrow's problems, and I think that is what has happened to us. If we do not upgrade our solutions with keeping up with the problems of tomorrow, we'll probably get stuck with there. So what we are seeing is the nature of problems has gone up in the last 10 years since we talked about Agile Manifesto. We need to really look at it and say whether our solution should be upgraded or not. So the question that comes is, on one hand, we are celebrating all this fantastic people progress, which is really leading to innovation happening in the larger context. On the other hand, the question that comes is, when all these processes are there, does it make sense to look at them in the same way that we've been looking at them before, or can we do away with all the processes there? So I have a favorite question here that I would like to ask here. What you see is a bicycle here with very funnily names of all the parts of the bicycle have been actually typographically pasted at each of these cycle parts. Now, if you like Formula 1 cars, there's a Formula 1 racing car. So think of a Formula 1 car. What do you think is the most important part of this bicycle or a Formula 1 car? Any answers will do. Chain. Okay. Wheel. Okay, handle. Okay, what about Formula 1 car? We know the Ferrari cars, they go at zooming speed, they're like, they just put the whole racetrack on fire. What is the most important thing in those Formula 1 racing cars? Well, thanks for the right answer. Brakes is really the most important part of this. Most of the time we are led to believe that engine is the most important part of that. But I think the fact is the brakes is the most important part. And when I look at processes there, I like to say, because if you see, now imagine riding a bicycle that has no brakes there, you cannot go faster. But try to put the brakes back in the bicycle and you can actually go faster. That should be the level of control a process should have there. And that's what I think is the right balance that we need to be looking at. Thank you. I'm just about to wind up here. So what are we learning? I think the innovation is the game. More of same is not enough. We need to really constantly keep pushing the envelope. The startups breed innovation, and when I say startup, I put it quote unquote. The reason is I'm taking the literal definition of what Eric Ries talks about in Lean Startup, which says startup is actually a human endeavor done under extreme conditions of uncertainty. It does not have to be 3 people sitting in a garage and working on the next killer idea. It could be as many as that many people sitting in a large company like yours and mine who are undertaking an extreme uncertain idea. So no risk, no reward, we all understand that. Investing on smart people is, I think, important there. One of the credos in Facebook is let them break stuff. We are too risk averse, I think. We are trying to make sure that we don't fall or we don't hurt ourselves in the process. The key is to really let the smart guys have them there and don't impose a process on them. They will figure out. If we truly believe in agility as a notion, then we believe in self-organization of the team, in which case imposing a process is a moot point. If the team is really that you can trust them to figure out their own process, let them figure out. If they believe agile is not the right thing for them, let them throw it out of the window. Let them figure out what really works for them. And finally, don't confuse means with ends. It's not about the tool. And I just want to end this with the last thing here. And I'll tell you the source of this photograph. So read with me. A photographer went to a socialite party in New York. As he entered the front door, the host said, I simply love your pictures. They are wonderful. You must have a fantastic camera. And he said nothing until the dinner was finished and then said, that was a wonderful dinner. You must have a terrific stove. How easily we sometimes tend to insult people by saying that, wow, this is a great photograph. Do you have a Canon or a Nikon? I think the point we are trying to miss in this process is that processes are really as good as the eye behind the camera, the fingers behind the tools, and the brain and the heart behind the process that is being implemented by them. End of the day, it's really about the people process that we are into. And I think we should not ignore that fact that process is a reflection of the ability of people to cope up in a sociological problem-solving process. So thank you.
Thanks, Tadhagat. Wonderful. That was wonderful. Actually, it reminded us we were actually crafting in the 1970s because we didn't have processes and tools. Then in between came processes and tools. We said we could only do so much with them. So we've gone back to crafting again. So thanks for putting the people process at the right level. Now we have no better to talk about the people process than the Chief People Officer from Happiest Minds. Over to Raja.
Good morning. Oh, sorry, good afternoon. It's nice to be here. I'm a little confused on why I'm here. I'm in the middle of process and project leaders who are talking about people. And I'm the only people guy here. I asked the question to Vishu when he asked me to come and talk here. He didn't give me the answer. I asked JV, he hasn't given me the answer. Just to possibly add on to what Tadhagat said, in 75 we talked about craft, and that's why most of us jumped into this software programming and the knowledge industry because we thought we were going to do all this. Today, almost every IT company has a factory model. Right. So the concept of knowledge worker versus factory worker, we don't know where we are, and we are now today trying to create this new term called craft using, and hopefully this will get us somewhere. I am going to start with a story and end with a story and give a few stories in between. The first one is about knowledge management. All of us have this department in our organizations, knowledge management group, knowledge, whatever. And we have a lot of discussions about what is knowledge management. It is not archiving, it is not this, it is not that. I also have seen in my last 25 years this humongous difficulty organizations face in harnessing knowledge, storing knowledge, disseminating knowledge, and getting something out of the knowledge that these organizations create. I came across this nice story in a speech that Ashok Soota forwarded to me just last week, so I thought I'll share this with you, in terms of what could be a nice way to get knowledge from our people. This is in Ramayana, so if people have read Ramayana, you would have known this. This is when Ravana was finally defeated and he was going to die. And Rama tells Lakshmana, hey, before he dies, this guy, even though he was a bad man, he took away my wife, he did all these wrong things, he is a learned person, he has a lot of knowledge that he can share with us. Why don't we get that from him so it is not lost to this world? Right. So Lakshmana goes to him, stands next to Ravana and says, sir, please give me your knowledge. So Ravana says, get lost. So he comes back to Rama and says, what is this? You're putting me in trouble. First of all, you almost killed him. Now you're going and saying, please give me your knowledge. And he's insulted me. So Rama asks him, how did you ask him? And Lakshmana tells him, I went to next to his face because I have to listen to him. So I next to his head and he's dying. I asked him, please tell me. Okay, come, let's go back again. So Rama goes back to Ravana, kneels down at his leg and says, sir, you are a great person. You have lots of knowledge. Would you kindly share with us? Because if you die without sharing, it will all be lost to this world. Now Ramana is so happy that there is this humility in this person asking me for this knowledge. and he shares it with him, saying, okay, I don't have much time. The one thing that I can share with you is that I realized my folly of going behind the wrong thing, which was your wife. I wish I would have known that would have made friends with you. We could have all lived a better life. And he dies. Now, tell me, in our knowledge management system that we have in all our organizations, how do we ask for knowledge from our people? How much respect and humility do we have when we seek knowledge from our project people? Right. And we call it the post-mortem survey. So that's the first story. The second one is about empowerment. I was facilitating a group of senior leaders, and they were trying to figure out how we can come together as a group, how we can add value to this organization, how we can create empowerment in our people so they can deliver, because everybody is asking. We talked about Indian culture, all of us want to be told what to do, we are not empowered. So all these things were happening. So I sort of said, okay, there were about 15 of them GM level plus people. First question I asked, how many of you in your group really feel empowered? There was the silence. Then if you don't feel empowered, what are you going to empower your own people? Again, silence. Then okay, let me make it easier for you. If you want to feel empowered, what would you want to be done so that you can feel empowered? So there was a lot of back scratching, head scratching and all that. And finally, they said, okay, we don't want to be micromanaged. Good. So what will you do to your team? We won't micromanage them. We will tell them what to do, and we will wait for them to come and give it to us after 3 weeks, and we will then work with them. Good idea. What happens if that person doesn't know what he's supposed to do? You can give him the task and a high-level thing, but if he's not enabled, are you really empowering him? So, before getting on to giving the power and giving the authority, maybe we should first look at ensuring that they have the right capabilities. You can call it the craft, you can call it the tool, you can call it the knowledge. Make sure that we have them, they have them, and then get on to the empowerment process. The third story is about thought leadership. Now this is a new buzzword in the industry. All of us have to be thought leaders. We have to. Now what am I doing? I'm leading thought. I'm a thought leader. So all of us want to have thought. We have to showcase our knowledge. We have to brand. Otherwise, we are a consulting company. How will customers know us? So we have to do this thought leadership. So we had a task force in our organization. We said we have to increase our thought leadership activities. So we said we'll put up this task force, we'll put up a contest and all that, and then we had this discussion about how do we go about increasing thought leadership. And now anyway, white papers are all passé because it's too long, people don't read it. It has to be tweets, it has to be Facebook posts, it has to be blogs, microblogs. So we will create one where we'll create a lot of this content. Fair enough. Who's going to create it? Okay. So we will have these people in the company, we'll create a contest, they will do this thing. Fine. So what will you tell them? So we'll go do this and we'll give you money. So how much will you give? We'll have a contest and the first prize winner will have 25,000 rupees or an iPad. Okay, fair enough. So what's the contest? So then suddenly said, why would I want to do this for 25,000 rupees? I have to spend 6 months doing all this, a long context. I would rather go and buy the iPad myself. I said, fine. So ask yourself, what are you telling these kids to do? No, this is required for marketing. Good. So they are actually working for marketing, so you are paying them. You are actually subcontracting for your marketing department. Isn't that what it is? I said, think about it. Why would you ask a technical person to subcontract for marketing guy? And what is that he's getting out of it? Okay, then tell me what you need to, because whenever you ask a question, then your response comes back to you. If you tell me I'm doing wrong, you tell me what I should do. Okay? That's the problem. If you're a leadership guy, then you also have the answers. You can't just ask the questions and get away. So I said, okay, you tell me what will excite this guy to come and do this without paying money? Can you tell them, we will convert you into rock stars? Can you tell them that we will make you the most recognized people in the social media world? So we will create a platform that will help you showcase your views. We will make you public. We will make you popular. You will become the toast of your community. You will become the pride of your family. And we will put the investment of creating the process, the learning, the encouragement. And by the way, at the end of it all, if you really do a great stuff, there is also an icing on the cake. You will get some goodies. Now you change the context. Right? And now there will be a queue for doing this, then wondering, why should I waste my time for 6 months for 25,000 rupees? So that's the thought leadership story. How are we doing for time?
Couple of minutes.
Thank you. We talked about goals versus means and alignment, and look at the process that we follow in our organizations when we take in people and see how we make them align to these organizations when we come there. I had this experience. I normally welcome people when they come to my organization. And I ask them, where are you from and what are you going to do and which organization. So there are a few people who tell me, I am a Java person. Okay, so which business unit have you been hired to? We have this various acronyms. I don't want to name the actual acronym, then you will possibly relate it to my group in my company, so I don't want to do that. But then, okay, but I don't know what this acronym means. So I asked them, do you know what this business unit does? I don't know what this business unit does. Now this gentleman has staked his career and his future life in a company, in a business unit, where he does not know what the acronym of the group that he's going to work for, and he does not know what the business unit that is going to join is actually involved in what business. And somebody has interviewed him in technical terms, and somebody has interviewed him on non-technical skills and value level, and then he's come through 3 levels of interview process. And where are we talking about goal alignment? So where does it start? I mean, it has to start there. By the time he comes and listens to my assimilation presentation, he's already in a project, and when he's sitting and listening to me talking about mission, vision, values, he's actually wondering how is he going to solve his technical problem. And where is the alignment going to come? The next one is about getting to know each other. We are talking about the Facebook generation, we are talking about remote working, we are talking about working from home. We don't even see each other. How do we get to know each other? Right. And again, we had this large organization meeting where we have multiple cultures of people coming in from different organizations. So we said we have to have some networking, we need to know each other. So and then this group came and asked me, how do we create this environment where people share things about themselves so we can get to know them? So I asked them, what will you share for them to get to know about you if they were strangers for you? We never thought about that. If you don't know what you can share with them, how do you expect others to share anything about you? And that too, we want to know about them intimately so that you can know about them. So first, understand what you would like to talk about yourself to this group, and then we can do this. Fair. Now this happened, and then they came and said, we want to increase our networking, so can you help us to do this? I said, this is a small office. Just walk across the corridor, and they are not going to bite you. Find somebody whom you don't know and say hello, take him or take her for a tea. No, we have to cross a threshold. So can you please set up a matchmaking program that will randomly pick up people and connect each other over email, and then we will go and have tea and get to know each other. I will get to it maybe 10 years from now. Okay? The last story is from the Bible. I started with the Ramayana, so I ended the Bible. Most of us would have heard about the story of the Good Samaritan. Right? The context of the Good Samaritan was Jesus was narrating it to someone who asked him a question, who's this neighbor whom I'm supposed to love? Because one of the things about this is, you love your neighbor as you love yourself. So this person asked, who's this neighbor I should love? How do I find this good neighbor? So Jesus narrated this Good Samaritan story where this Jewish person was traveling, was waylaid by the robbers, and was left to die with all the wounds and all that. And then you had this priest, and then a learned Jewish person, and then this Samaritan who's a outsider in the Jewish community. He came and he saw this person, took him to a hotel, took care of him. All that happened. And then Jesus asked this person, now you tell me, who among these three people who walked past this person is a good neighbor for this person? Oh, it's all obvious. This Samaritan man who took care of him, put him onto the hotel or whatever, the inn there and all that, he's the good neighbor. The other two were actually ignored him, and they can't be good neighbors. So then Jesus told him, okay, so now you know who the good neighbor is. So you go be the good neighbor and don't look for good neighbors. That's actually what we heard in this morning from both the speakers. It's not that we have to have processes and people coming and telling us what to do. I think we have to look at what we can do to change or improve what we need to do. And if we can be good neighbors, people around us can figure out what makes us good, and they can be good neighbors. And then we can create this radiating process where we can make those changes. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Wonderful stories. Not only need to remember the stories, but the takeaways to the stories. Can I request Shankar to share his perspectives? We haven't received any questions so far, so if I don't receive questions, I'm going to ask the questions. Actually, I motivate them to ask.
That sounded like a threat.
It's going good.
Okay, so no questions.
Question will come after this.
Okay. So good morning, everybody. So Veera's JV's threat to ask questions reminds me of an anecdote. I wouldn't name the country, right? So I was visiting this particular country and had to make a presentation, I think on Six Sigma or something like that. And the organizer said, can you send us the deck which you would like to use? And then so I had emailed it about a week or so in advance. And then they said, anybody listening to this deck, what could be some of the questions the participants might ask, right? So I also said these could be some of the questions they might ask, right? So we sent out these 5-6 questions as well. And then there were a few panelists who spoke. And after that, the moderator said, okay, now we have some questions from the audience. So the first question came. I listened to it, I said, was this not what I had written? And then the second question came, right? Then it was confirmed, okay? So I hope JV doesn't have to do it. Right? He has declared that he has got his set of questions. Yeah. So please bear with me, I've been having a bad throat over the last few weeks. Now, we've been talking about it, right? And any organization, if it has to achieve its right business strategy and business plans, there are multiple dimensions to it. Okay, we will keep talking about the people, process, and the technology triad. And if any of these, falls out, or if in combination, right? And that is what earlier Tathagat was talking about the tool. You can have the best of tools, but then if they are used inappropriately, that can also cause disaster. And then of course the people dimension is extremely critical as well. And if any of these aspects are weak, then obviously the organization is not going to succeed, the engine is going to come apart. Now, people element, there are several, typical themes which, from the people aspect, which sabotage organizational success or excellence. Now, among these things, there are a few, top of the mind themes. Are there organizations which like their employees to be loyal? What kind of a question is that, right? So, all organizations like their employees to be loyal, right? Okay. So, there are two employees in an organization. Somebody has worked with the organization for 4 years and another person has worked with the organization for 15 years. So, who do you think is more loyal? 15. You can't decide like that. Okay, so what other information do you need for deciding? Okay. So, you can't decide like that, that's right. So, it's a question of how do you define loyalty. So, there was this particular organization where I was speaking to a lot of people, and a number of people in this organization had stayed put in that organization for 16 years, 18 years, 20 years. Now, I don't have anything against people who stay in an organization for 20 years, by the way, right? So, and then I was curious. So, I was asking them, right, so what is it that makes you stay in this organization for such a long time? I said, see, we are free to do whatever we want. Nobody asks us, right, what we have to do. You remember, Preeti clarified about this easygoing part. She said it is not that easygoing. Whereas in this organization, that was the prevalent case. So the element is, when organizations look for loyalty, it cannot be just in terms of, how long somebody has worked with the organization. It has to be in terms of how aligned people are to what the organization is trying to do, right? And are they also, is their thinking, is their individual aspirations aligned to the organization's aspirations? Now, sometimes, unfortunately, it might happen, you say, this is not what I like to do, but what do I do, right? I don't have a choice, so I am staying put. That is one element. The second element is that we've been talking of processes, right? Whether it is ISO, CMMI, HR processes, etc., etc. Question to ask is, how often do you find processes which says, if these are the characteristics of the people, this is the process to follow? Doesn't, right? So whether it is a consultant or a auditor, anybody, I am also an auditor, says, have you done peer review? No, non-compliance. Right? Has somebody reviewed your estimate? No, there is a risk. Right? So there is no notion of, and in fact when we start by saying, when somebody asks, okay, why do you need processes in your organization? We want to say, we want to make it, people independent. Right? So it goes back to, the proverbial, any Tom, Dick and Harry should be able to use these processes. It doesn't work that way. Right? So the idea is, the processes have to be calibrated to the knowledge, the skills, the motivation levels of the individuals who are expected to do the processes. Right? So that is another important element which seldom is focused upon. Third is there is this notion of locked knowledge. So what is this notion of locked knowledge? I have done a lot of work in banks. Okay, so in the past, I've done work, right? Somebody says, but currently I am working with the business unit which is doing work with retail customers. And there is another business unit which is focused on, banks, and they are struggling with, they have had problems, customer escalations. They say, you don't understand what happens in the banking industry. Right? So how often are organizations, willing to go and say, right, we have a person who has got experience in the banking area, working in another business unit. No, not available because our processes don't allow it. Right? The resource management process says you either be here or there. There are no charge codes available, right? And if we allocate, the person will not come back. So we like to have locked knowledge, which is the individual is suffocating because the individual is not able to use his or her knowledge. The organization is suffering because the organization is looking for somebody with that knowledge all over the place and not being able to find it, right? So these are some of the challenges which we face when we deal with people, and this in turn, many of these have several repercussions. Now, there are several themes with respect to dealing with people, right? But what I want to do is over the next few minutes, I want to focus on only one theme, which is in terms of the skills dimension, right? As you know, many of the speakers before brought out some things we need to ask ourselves is in organizations, right? When learning happens for the individual, how often is there an understanding, at the individual level saying, why am I attending this particular training? Or why am I acquiring this particular certification? Does it fall in line with what I am aspiring to do in my career? Right? Does it fall in line with what my organization wants to do? Me acquiring this knowledge, how will it help my project? How will it help my organization? Several times the idea of somebody attending a training is because my manager nominated me for that training. My manager nominated me for the training because the learning and development department escalated saying your business unit is falling short on this particular metric. Number of people achieving the certification is lesser. So it comes back to the theme of both the organization creating an environment for individuals to manage themselves in the learning dimension. See, we've been talking about empowerment. Now, empowerment is a very wide term. I'm saying for a minute, let us look at empowerment only in one perspective, okay, which is in an organization, what is the empowerment available for individuals to develop themselves, right? And if an individual has to develop themselves, they need to have that empowerment. What is the information they should have? What is the overall context which should be available to them? So several times do individuals understand what is the organization trying to do? Where do I fit into this scheme of things, right? And how can I, if this is the scheme of things, how can I develop myself? How many of you have heard of companies which have got a career path? I won't ask you questions, feel free to put your hands up. Yeah, right. So what would happen in today's world if a company says we will announce all potential promotions 4 years in advance?
Never happens, sir.
Never happens. Okay. So, but by the way, there are organizations who do that. Okay. May or may not be in the software industry, but there are organizations who do that. So the idea is not about the promotion part of it. The idea is, how do we get clarity on, right, where is my organization headed, where am I headed, and how do I align my learning to that. And that is where it is very, very important for individuals to understand, where is my organization headed. So I'm not just looking at learning for my current task, I also look at, what is the learning I need to do for the future, both for myself and which is also useful for the organization. And of course from the organizational dimension as well, how does the organization ensure that what people are acquiring is meaningful for the organization, right? So that is the key element I wanted to emphasize on. So while we look at this notion of empowerment, etc., how do we bring about this consciousness and awareness where individuals understand, right, what is happening in the organization from a business plan point of view, right? And how does the organization give a enable people, right? So we've been talking about this empowerment and enablement. So there was this interesting scenario where in this particular organization there is a very successful engagement manager, and there was this person who had joined that function in a relatively junior role, and as our colleague was saying, this junior person went with all humility and said, I have observed that you are very, very successful in your role as an engagement manager. So I want to know what you did to become successful. So please tell me, what all you did in your career. Right. So this person says, yeah, I studied mechanical engineering. Then I worked as a MIS professional in some venture capital company. Right. Then I was computerizing, some cement warehouses. Right. Then I was also learning, concurrently something on Indian philosophy, right? And then, I did some, evening program on management courses. Now, question is, what do we do with all this information, right? Each one of us are different individuals. So what works for one person cannot work.